This is ridiculous. I need a coffee table. Time to get back in the garage. Going to the garage, gonna build some new stuff. It's been such a long while. With the garage somewhat clear and actually having some space to move and clean air to breathe, I decided to assemble my pallet wood collection. Now, because of all the deliveries, this wasn't even all of it, but I wanted to see what I had available. After I'd collected it all together, I then got rid of half the pile. Half of it is a lot thicker than the other stuff, and from my last table in this style, I'm guessing I've got enough material, not 100% sure, but I do know the thinner wood with thicker ply base is a better option. Now, I can't stress how important it is to make sure that your pallet wood is free of all nails. It's wonderful that this stuff is free and easy to get hold of, but that's no use if you go and trash your £200 planer thicknesser. So after making sure it was completely clear, it was then the laborious task of putting it through one board at a time. And unfortunately for me in this design, there's a lot of boards to go through. So while I'm putting these through, I'll talk to you about the design that I'm going for. I've used a similar design on a round coffee table I posted probably a year and a half ago, and I really like the design, and we've actually got that table in our living room now. And we wanted a coffee table to go with it, because apparently the circular one would be better suited for a plant that we will probably kill off within the first month. The design itself is quite a simple one, but looks really effective. You're basically just cutting the boards at a 45-degree angle, both ends at the same angle, creating a rhombus, but I'll show you exactly how I do that later on. The other thing I wanted to talk to you guys about is I need a bit of advice. I had a Titan shop vac from Screwfix. It cost about 50 or 60 quid, I think, and it eventually gave up the ghost. So I haven't got any kind of dust extraction or shop vac or anything at the minute. I was kind of wondering what you guys are doing. Every time I look on YouTube and I search for a small shop dust extraction, it's either just get a shop vac or spend $5,000 on this massive system. So is anybody able to point me in the right direction? Should I just go for a shop vac or a couple of shop vacs to save wheeling them round? Or is there a better solution out there that will suit a 2-car garage? Because that's the only space I've got. With the boards rough planed, and I didn't take them too far because I do actually want some lumps, bumps and indents on the wood itself. I found that when you're using pallet wood, the more perfect you try to get it, the more it ends up just looking like cheap pine. And I know it is cheap pine, but you get a rustic look from pallet boards that I do try and keep. So then I'm on the table saw here, the death machine, and I'm basically just trying to get a straight-ish edge. It's more about taking the splinters off to give a gluing face than it is squaring anything up. Because I'm going to cut these boards into so many smaller pieces, you don't actually need a completely straight edge. It doesn't matter too much. So I've got this ply left over from my office build, and I plan on using this as the base for the table that I'm going to glue all of the bits of pallet wood on top. Now, when I made the circular coffee table that you saw at the start of the video, my intention was always to sell it. The reason I didn't, despite loving the look of it, was because over time it cupped, because I only mounted those pallet pieces onto 9mm ply, and it just wasn't strong enough to prevent the glue drying, the pallet changing, and it created a cup. Nothing severe, but if I'm going to sell things, I have a bit of a perfectionist mentality. Now this is a little bit small, which is my only worry. The wife said she doesn't want a coffee table any bigger than we've got at the minute. And at the minute, our coffee table is 840 mil. Now this is 820. So we're talking that much shorter. I'm hoping that will be all right. Because if it looks really small and weird, I'm not going to be happy. And it'll be another piece of furniture I've made that doesn't get used or doesn't get sold. Ugh. Right, I'm going to do my very best to go into teacher mode here. Now, to get your perfect rhombus that fits together in this pattern, you need to set your mitre saw to 45 degrees and then take a first cut. Do not throw away the scrap bit. That's going to be your stop block. Now, as accurately as possible, you want to measure the length of that diagonal that you just cut. Whatever that measurement is, that stop block that you've just created needs to be that far away from where your blade falls on your mitre saw. That way, when you make the next cut, the uncut side will be the same length as the cut side, which is the same length as the other cut side, which is the same length as the other uncut side. Now, following this method, it does not matter at all how thick your wood is, how wide the planks are. You've just got to make that first cut, take that measurement, and then that's the distance your stop block goes. See? Crystal clear. And if absolutely everything has gone to plan, and you have made your measurements correct, put your stop block in the correct position, and you do a very nice clean cut to the best of your ability, then you will end up with a perfect rhombus. Once you've marvelled at your own prowess, then get back down to earth. You've got about 70 cuts to make. Off you go. I didn't mention the width of the coffee table earlier, and that is for good reason. I don't know the width of the coffee table. I've drawn some rough lines here, an ideal width if you would like, and then I've drawn a centre line. Now I'm going to take these pieces and start basically just putting them into a sort of position that they're going to be in. Now this will determine how wide the coffee table is. As you can see, these star shapes do not reach the edge of the coffee table, which means I'm going to have to cut a tiny little nubbin to stick on the end there. That is not ideal because I'm going to round the top of this coffee table. If those little pieces catch the router in the wrong way, they explode. Don't ask me how I know this, they just will, trust me. So I'm going to have to knock about 20 mil off the width of this coffee table to bring it all into a happy balance. With those new lines drawn, you can see that the edges of the star fall nicely on the edge of that line. Now, don't get me wrong, there's still going to be lots of little bits that you kind of have to attach here, there and everywhere. That's why I've saved all of my offcuts from cutting these rhombuses. Rhombi. Anyway, I've kept all of the scraps. They're going to fill some of the gaps. However, you'll notice that wherever that star pattern doesn't meet the edge of the table, there is plenty of room to add some glue, so there's no risk of them flying out when you go to take them to the router table. I don't want my coffee table to have perfectly square corners. I want it to be a rectangle, but I want it to have rounded corners. So this is my Goldilocks moment. So, is it this tin? No, that's too small. Is it this tub of 3mm tile spacers? No, still too small. If you want to know what the perfect radius is for a table like this, it is a screw-fix tub of tile clamps. Radius. I then went ahead and rough cut this with a jigsaw, and when I say rough cut, I'm staying on the outside of that pencil line that I drew. I'm then going to use the belt sander to bring it up to that line. If you haven't got a belt sander, you can do this with just a sanding pad and some determination and good forearms. But the reason I'm getting this base cut as perfectly as I can is because this is going to be the template for when I route everything later. I'm basically going to use a flush cut bit, and I want to get this perfect so then the top will end up being perfect too. I needed you to share my misery there. That was a lot of sanding. Anyway, these are those offcuts that I was talking about earlier. They're just the random ends of the pallet boards that I cut off and I kept them to one side, and they are perfect for filling in those gaps. This is the exciting part. You get to see what it's going to look like. After carefully sliding off those pieces in the right orientation and the right way up, I then slather an absolute ton of glue. Now I've split this into quadrants, and I'm working on each quadrant because it's actually quite a bit warmer today. It's 12 degrees, which means that that glue is going to go off even quicker than normal. Then after that, I'm literally just slapping this on top of the glue while using any excess to paint any faces that are going to touch another face. It is as simple as that. There's no clamps or anything involved here. Now I have been careful to make sure that the grain goes in random directions. This is going to come back to bite me later on, but I do feel like it's important for the look. So you shouldn't, if I've done it properly, see any two pieces going in the same direction that are touching. Apart from the odd couple, because I broke my brain trying to figure it out. Now this next step is going to seem very amateurish to a lot of people, and I'm sure there'll be some people that get annoyed by it. But this pallet table is made from, you guessed it, pallets. And it's not supposed to look high-end, and I'm okay with that. There was actually a segment of the video I recorded, but the audio was corrupted, where I kind of talk about the imperfections in what you do. And a lot of YouTube channels lead you to believe that something has to be absolutely perfect for you to be proud of it. Now I'm telling you now, doing this voiceover, I'm very proud of this table. And look at this mess I'm about to make. I'm basically taking a load of glue, fill in any big visible gaps I can see, and then I get a handful of sawdust off the floor because I've got no dust extraction. I sprinkle it on, and then I rub it into the cracks basically. The finer sawdust falls into the cracks and sticks and adheres with the glue. The bigger stuff just brushes off. And it actually works really well to plug the gaps. And if I'm honest, I like the look of it. I like the effect. If this was 5 board lengths all put together trying to create a nice crisp table, it'd look awful. But for this application, it works. So I mentioned earlier that there was no clamping involved, and there's not, but there does need to be weight involved. So I went inside, took the roll of baking paper that I got in trouble for not taking back, laid that down to protect this other piece of plywood that I laid on top. Then I had to roam around the garage looking for heavy objects. Some dumbbell weights from COVID lockdown days. 5 litres of contractor's PVA. A fire extinguisher. And 2 buckets of fire kindling. After leaving that to glue up overnight, the next day I flipped it upside down, clamped it to the table, and then I'm taking that jigsaw again and I'm trying to follow the line of the underside of the table. I'm getting as close as humanly possible without running that blade up against the bottom of the table. I'm basically trying to give the router table less to do, and if I'm using a flush cut bit, I don't want to be chewing into the base with that blade. Over on the router table, I'm using a straight flush cut bit just to take off those remaining little scraps, and this slides over stupidly easy because of how close I got with the jigsaw, and I'm hoping you can see it on camera, but it gives such a nice clean finish. Now the only sad side of putting the glue and the sawdust all over it is it does increase how much you have to sand. So I start off with quite a low grit. I go with 60 grit, then 80 grit, then 120, and then that opens up any remaining gaps that I do need to fill. I'm going to sand it finally at 180 because I've found that that's the best for the water-based dye that I use. Again, please don't take this as preaching, but a mistake that I've made in the past is fitting the hardware afterwards. You finish your table, you turn it upside down, you've missed a little scrap of wood and it's left a dent. So before I finish or even get to the final sand, I like to flip the table over and fit for the hardware. I'm just using some £20 hairpin legs, I believe they're called, off Amazon. In fact, they were less than 20 quid, free next day delivery, and I'm using one of these punchy drill thingy marking things. I bought it for when I did the kitchen, and it saves so much time and it's so much more accurate than drawing in that hole with a pencil. Okay, so I've marked out all of my hardware. I'm only going for 3 screws on each hairpin leg because I feel like 5's overkill and I couldn't get the angle on the drill. Didn't want to mark them, do them afterwards. Never mind, this is my table, my rules. Now, as you can see here, the glue and sawdust trick worked an absolute treat in every place that I spotted it needed to be. There are, however, quite a few nail holes, there's a few gaps where I've missed, but that's why God invented wood filler. Now, I would go back and do this sawdust and glue trick, but it takes a hell of a lot of sanding. A lot of sanding. I've just spent at least 20 minutes getting this to this point and it's not even final sanded. So I'm going to use the wood filler because it only takes a couple of hours. I'm staining it anyway. This takes a little bit of the tint of the stain and I quite like the look. Like I say, my table, my rules. Now, to use a ungodly amount of this stuff. So I'm sticking with the my table, my rules thing purely because I've got the wrong colour wood filler from B&Q. I didn't realise I've got natural, not the white stuff. Never used it before, so I'm hoping it works out alright. I haven't got a lot of faith though because the colour of it looks like something from The Only Way is Essex. I love getting to this point on any project where you feel like you're onto the final touches. Now, through experience you learn that these final touches all tend to take quite a while, but you actually start to see what something's going to look like. So for the bottom where you can see the plywood, I'm going to use a 45-degree bit and take off some of that plywood. I haven't got a bit or a router that's big enough to take it all off because it's 18mm ply, but it's just going to give a bit of an angle, and I was quite surprised at how nice seeing some of the ply made it look. With a 45 on the bottom, I used a round over bit on the top. Now, I did make a couple of slips with this one and took out a few divots, and then I remembered, this is pallet wood. It's made of divots. And then my favourite part, putting on the wood dye. This is Little Fair's oak wood dye. It's not a sponsor, I just absolutely love it. It's the same dye we've used for the skirting and the doors in our house, so we wanted the table to match. It does such an incredible job of bringing that grain out and taking everything from that white colour that will eventually go yellow because it's pine and just bringing out a more reddish hue. It does something about colour blocking the yellows and oranges that come through and just leaves it looking like this. Now, some of the bits of skirt we've had in our house for over a year, full sunlight, and they've not gone yellow. I thoroughly recommend it. With the colour I want, it's now time for the finish and the protection for the table. First goes 2 coats of the Little Fair's varnish. It's water based, it goes on really easy, but I have learnt from experience you are supposed to brush it over afterwards with the grain. Yeah, kind of thinking back now to that thing I said earlier about making sure all the grain goes in different directions. So because this needs 2 coats, I had to meticulously take that paintbrush and brush with the grain on every single piece. And it took ages. There's 2 coats of this varnish goes on, and you sand really lightly with a very high grit. I think I used 1000 grit in between each one, and it just makes it butter smooth. And as if that wasn't protection enough, you clearly don't know what our household is like. So I've put some wax on and then I'm going to buff that off. Now trust me when I say this is the difference maker. That table looks really matte at the minute because it's got the wax on. Just look what a little bit of elbow grease does. And that seems like a lot of finishes. Dye, varnish, sand, varnish, wax, buff, but look at the beading on that water. That is so much better. I'm really pleased with how this table turned out. I knew I'd like the design because I like it on that one over there, but it fits the room perfectly. We've only got a small living room, so we needed a smaller coffee table, and this doesn't look too big in the room, nor does it look too small. Matches the windowsills, the skirts, the doors. Couldn't be happier. If you've got anything from watching this video, please take the time to leave a like or a comment or subscribe if you're not already. And I will see you in the next one, which I promise will not be as far away as this one was from the last one.